Alright, hey everybody, and here we have another tutorial on a new helmet. This time is inspired by Chainsaw Man, but more specifically Reze's helmet. Now I do have patterns available for this in my bio, so feel free to check that out. Now if you guys ever do decide to purchase a pattern off of me, or for anyone for that matter, I do recommend that you do print it out on paper and then do a test fit to see how it fits. I will provide some information on sizing, but just be aware that this helmet is going to fit very snugly if your head size is similar to mine. So you might want to size up, maybe 10%, or keep it as is, but I'll get into that later. We are just going to be using a box cutter and primarily 8mm craft foam. I do end up using more detailed foam like 5mm and 2mm, but 8mm I find to be a good happy medium for the base of this project. So I can summarize the entire build phase of this project by tracing out the patterns onto the 8mm craft foam and then very carefully cutting out the shapes. Here we have an eye socket, and I'm going to be very careful to offset it, and I'll talk about that later. Most importantly for this build, though, is the utilization of a heat gun. If you don't use a heat gun, your shapes will be very flat, so in this case, the helmet is very curvy, so heat shaping them with a heat gun is very important. So after cutting out my pieces, I use a heat gun to soften the foam, and then bend it into a curved shape in both directions. Here you can see the difference between a piece that has been heat shaped and a piece that hasn't been. This piece is relatively flat, nothing wrong with it, but in terms of getting the curvature from the helmet design, you are going to be needing a heat gun. Now after cutting out all of your pieces, you are going to be gluing them together. My choice of adhesive is of course contact cement, and you are going to be wearing a respirator, right? I know how much you guys love that. For a brush, I like to use scrap pieces of foam, and they work just fine for me. I really do emphasize the use of a heat gun because the curvatures will make it much more easier to glue pieces together. Now eventually you're going to get one half of the front piece, and you have to mirror those patterns to get the other side. Now spoiler alert, I am going to be redoing this front half, and I could have edited it out in the video, but I decided to keep it, and it'll make more sense later. For this eye socket, you'll notice I did offset this piece inward, so I cut out this shape and then I slightly glued it past the flush point. Now here is the tricky part with the rear half. I have these pieces here and they kind of look like curved triangular bananas. I'm not really sure how to explain them, but essentially if you cut out these pieces as they are, you'll get the general shape of Reze's helmet. However, to get those recessed edges, this is the technique that I used. After cutting out all of the component pieces, I decided to cut out a channel on each edge, and those channels are noted on my patterns through dashed lines. So using my hobby blade, I very carefully cut halfway through the foam, not to cut all the way through, to cut out this piece of foam. And you'll see we have this square channel cut out. Now if you find this part to be a bit too difficult, you could just ignore those channels and then glue on additional separate layers to form those unique patterns. And so after gluing all of your pieces, it is going to look something like this. I do want to note that this part here is where the back of your neck is going to be, and you may find that you need to cut more into this so that it'll better fit your neck. Now here is kind of the bottom of the nose, and I am cutting this portion at a slight angle. That way when I glue the pieces together, it won't be completely flush, but at an angle. Now if you haven't already figured it out, your visibility won't be the best here because your line of vision will rest where the mouth is. And here we have the mouthpiece. Think of the mouth as kind of like a motorcycle visor, where we have this general shape with the teeth inset, and it's going to be placed like this. This is a paper pattern for now, and I'm just doing a test fit right now. Now here I believed I used 5mm EVA foam. Just because that this portion is going to be resting close to your face, I want to leave as much space as possible while still maintaining a close fit with the helmet. I use my hobby blade to cut out slits in the teeth, and then I'm going to be using my Dremel rotary tool to round out the edges. You can see here that the gaps in the teeth are going to give me a little bit of visibility, but more importantly, allow some air into the mask. Again, this part I feel as though is a perfect place where you can practice your own creative discretions. So if you want to make a totally different mouth, that's totally fine. This is just what I came up with for now. And that mouthpiece is going to glue in place on these two edges here. Now this portion doesn't need to be perfect because we are going to be covering up those seams with some foam clay, so it won't really matter too much if it's not the cleanest. Now here I am just adding the lip pieces. There are two lip pieces here, the upper portion and the lower portion. And here I also cut the edges at an angle, that way the pieces will be, well, at an angle. Now, since visibility is going to be a huge issue, I decided to create a hinging mechanism for the helmet. Think of like a Power Ranger helmet where it opens up like a clamshell. So using a long strip of 8mm EVA foam, I'm going to create a lip that goes on the inside of this helmet. This lip is going to give some surface for magnets that I'm going to glue on. To create the hinge, I'm going pretty simple and I'm using this 1-inch elastic. I'm going to cut out a slit on the top of this mask portion and then glue it in place so that it can just hinge up. I just glued some additional 2mm craft foam pieces to make it a little more sleek, but at the end of the day, you are just gluing on a piece of fabric. And it's going to close something like this. But in order for it to snap in place, I am going to be using some magnets. Here I use small neodymium magnets and I cut out small circles into that lip that we just made. This lip allows the magnets to have a nice surface to attach on, and it's going to allow the helmet to clamshell neatly in place. Now in order for this back helmet to stay in place, I'm going to be gluing on another fabric elastic onto the back half. This strap is going to rest around my neck, and that's going to allow the helmet to stay in place as the front portion hinges upward. I also added this buckle, and it helps for it to attach on more easily. Now at this point, a lot of my work is free-handed details, so I just want to make a shape that kind of gets the idea down, and then I just trim it to shape. So here we have this opening, and I know I need to put a cylinder in there. So what I decided here was to create a cylinder shape and reinforcing it with inner circles. I am then going to glue this in place, and it's going to look something like this. And this shape does go through the helmet, so I do have some extra room to add extra glue. I wanted the cylinder to be a bit thicker, so I created another thin rectangle and made that shape just a little bit larger. So it's going to look something like this. Now I don't believe this portion is actually accurate to the model itself, but I thought it was a fun detail, so I thought why not. So using 2mm EVA foam, I made a circle and then cut out slits to create this propeller. Okay, we're almost near the end, and at this point we just need to make a few more triangles, and those triangles are going to be the fins that rest on the back of the helmet. As always, I like to use contact cement, but in small instances like this, I think super glue would work just fine. Now at this point, I'm so close to being done, but I realized I just wasn't happy with how the helmet looked, so I decided to make a new model for the front half. Now you guys already know the steps on how I did the front piece of the helmet. The steps are all the same. I just personally wasn't happy with what I made. When I originally thought about this design, I wanted to have visibility through the teeth, and that meant I would have to reduce that nose portion of the helmet. But after making it, I really just wasn't happy with it, so I decided to make it a little bit more manga accurate. Now side by side, we have the original on the left, and then my redesigned version on the right. I'm also going to make the teeth a little bit more accurate to the manga, where the teeth are more flat than jagged. And speaking of teeth, I did draw inspiration from that wall tighten I made a while ago. So again, using the same techniques, I used my hobby blades and a rotary tool to create the teeth. Okay, now we need to fill in this area with foam clay. Foam clay is a great tool to utilize when you want organic shapes, and in this case, I'm going to just sculpt with my fingers and create a natural looking gum line that bridges the gap between the teeth and the nose. If you have fancy sculpting tools, feel free to use those, but you can get by with just using your fingers and some water. The front of the helmet also does have this oval portion, and what I do here is use my oval as a rough guide to pencil in the general shape. From there, I'm gently going to use my hobby blade to cut it out. You don't have to do this, it's not really going to help you with visibility, but what I decided to do was make a little hatch. It's not the best visibility, and I already have the visibility from the clamshell from the previous step, but this will just give me a little bit of extra visibility if I really needed it. Now here I'm going to use a bit of nylon webbing and a magnet in order for this thing to act like a hatch that just goes up and down. And here is what the helmet looks like. Now all we need to do is give it a nice paint job. In order to prime it, you could use Plastidip, but in this case, I'm going to be using Hex Flex, which is a flexible brush-on primer, and it's a bit glossy. Now for the teeth, it's pretty simple. I'm going to paint them white, and then over time, just add more layers to make it a bit more dirty. Now here I'm going to add an acrylic wash of black, just again to make the teeth a little bit more dirtier. This isn't a Colgate commercial, the teeth are going to be just a little bit more dirty. And that's it.
And here is my completed helmet. What do you guys think? So just for reference, my head circumference is about 22.5 inches. So depending on your own head size, you might need to scale up or scale down. But right now, this helmet is very tight to my face. And really, it is a bit uncomfortable to wear. So if you are going to wear this to an event or a convention, I highly recommend just taking breaks.
But with this way, I do have the method of having all this visibility
while having the compromised vision of this. But you also do have this, and I can see through the top portion of this helmet, but I just opted to do this way because I didn't want a visor or a mesh. I just wanted the complete look of the full helmet like this. So yeah, I think this is a happy compromise being able to do this, and yeah, it might not be the best way, but it's what I came up with. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them. Have a nice day.